continue presenting. So this is something that, like an algorithm, a step by step, walks you through the stages that we need to follow to build that mini model of a survey questionnaire. Okay, let's say we want to measure people's openness, pessimism or optimism. You might have come across with many people expressing how pessimistic they are about future. So especially, it has become very common. I don't know if there is a research in this country. I haven't seen it yet. Many young people, I have a teenager at home. They have a very gloomy idea about the future, and especially when they watch these movies, you know, apocalyptic movies, they think it's very gloomy, and they might be right to some extent. So we want to know, for instance, how optimistic or pessimistic a group of people, let's say university students in this university, are about the future, and what makes them. And you can see two parts in that question. One, descriptive, how pessimistic or optimistic they are. That's the description. The second one is what makes them optimistic, what makes them pessimistic. Okay. And so that's the explanative part. Most of the research questions are like that. And you cannot take this question to the field and ask people how optimistic you are. What makes you optimistic? No, it's not. You can't do that. That's their perception. It will be very subjective. So that's a research question. It's the guiding question. Now that you know what's the question you want to answer through your research, one way is that you look at the literature and see if there is enough theory about that. Yeah, that seems to be already. Optimism and pessimism is very much well studied and all over the places. And we can say, for instance, I don't know, people's experiences in childhood affects that. The type of ideology they follow or the faith they follow might have something to do with that. So you can read the literature. You can yourself with the team members of your research project may sit together and put a number of things that may affect people's optimism. And you also need to develop a definition, of course. You can't say, you know, just we're going to measure people's pessimism without a definition. So we always start with definition. So we need to define what optimism is. And here again, the literature helps you. The literature helps you, and also your thinking. We don't want to just copycat the literature. We want to also invent and reinvent. So we consult the literature. Thank you so much, everybody. And we learned something about optimism. Maybe we're satisfied. We only use that. We borrow that definition from someone, an author, and we say we define optimism this way. Or maybe we adopt it, but we adjust it. We think that's not a very good definition. We want to define it other way, in a little bit differently. So the literature helps us with the theory and with the definition. Now, let's say this is the definition. I'm making everything super simple, okay? Very simple. Let's say this is the definition. And let's say optimism is about having a vision of life or living conditions in the future that is better than now. That looks better than, to the respondents, of course, better than now. And the pessimism would be the opposite. That sounds still abstract. You can't still use that to measure people's pessimism, right? You can't just say, what vision of life you have, and does that look better than now? Okay, you need to actually, because it's quantitative, you need to make it, turn it to some questions that can make optimism or pessimism very measurable. That is called operationalization. A scary term, I know, but that means that we want to make an abstract concept into a number generating thing. And that means the statements or things, questions that actually when people react, they get a number for it, for their reaction. So that a concept that is turned to something measurable is no longer called concept. It's called indicator. Okay, indicator. So optimism becomes an indicator, indicating how much people are optimistic or pessimistic. Now, Okay, a little bit down. Oh, but another thing is that, well, okay, can we, for instance, say, okay, let's operationalize that definition. Let's say, how about asking people, what do you think of life in Australia in 20 years from now? Would that look much better, slightly or moderately better, the same, slightly worse, much worse? And you give them these options. How about that? And then someone who says gets much worse would gets the highest mark for pessimism. Someone says much better would gets the higher mark for optimism. And so those people in between gets the number in between. So in that case, what we want to do, it may work, but it's a lazy one. I'm afraid to say it works, but it's a lazy. I've seen it a lot, but it's a lazy one. Why it's a lazy one? Because you can actually life has many aspects. I mean, just to ask people how would life look like in 20 years is not adequate. Maybe we need to say, well, life has economic aspects. So how would economy look like in 20 years? And ecological aspect, how would the environment look like in 20 years? The I don't know, the social aspects, the political aspects. So it has many dimensions. Okay, is there anything in the chat room?
Yeah, there is a bit in the chat room. Everyone's saying goodbye, basically. Yeah, I think people have other places to be right now. Yeah.
Okay, make sure that they will watch it. But again, these things will be explained by the tutors as well, hopefully. So, but I want to make sure that my perspective, because I have designed it, is recorded there for people who want to watch it. So we need to make it multidimensional. So we need a number of statements that, for instance, because I may think the economy would be better, but the ecological aspect might get worse. Or you may think these socially things may get worse, but culturally maybe not. So you can see, depending on your view, life has different dimensions, and optimism towards life in future can have multiple dimensions. So we need multiple scores, but then you can't give people different numbers. I mean, people can't have different number, more than one number for their weight or for their height. I can't be, I don't know, 162 centimeters and at the same time 172 centimeters. So people cannot be 4 out of 5 for optimism and at the same time 2 out of 5. So although different dimensions, people get different numbers, but we need to combine them. In this case, we need to combine them and generate one number per person. And most of the time we average. We say, okay, socially 2 out of 5, politically 3 out of 5, ecologically 4 out of 5, and let's add them up and divide them by 3, and then that's the average. And that's the average score for one person, every person's optimism or pessimism. As I said, we also need theory. The theory doesn't come from out of blue. We need to actually go and use the literature, draw on the literature and see what the literature tells us. And we normally develop hypotheses that connect, that explains optimism one by one, that relates it to different aspects of life. For instance, gender, I know, maybe you say men are more likely to be pessimistic than women. That's a hypothesis. Or you may say the more educated people, the more pessimistic they are. That's another hypothesis. So every hypothesis grows on the theory, and it turns the theory to a number of statements, the hypothetical statements that connects only one factor to what you want to measure, optimism or pessimism. Okay. And that becomes the hypothesis. And so, of course, we need more questions. We need to have questions to measure people's gender, measure people's education, measure people's age, whatever else the theory says we should measure. We will go and we need questions for that. And well, I explained the literature review is very useful to give us ideas what other people have done, what other people have used. And when we sit and analyze the data, we connect our findings to other people's findings and we contribute to the dialogue. So the dialogue about optimism or pessimism will continue constantly. So we want to contribute to the literature. We just don't draw on the literature. We want to also give something back to the literature and make the dialogue go on. And so we need to be careful about the questionnaire. The questionnaire needs to be very professionally designed. And there's two things that I will explain next week: validity and reliability. And the validity and the reliability, for validity is that we want to make sure what we wanted to measure is being measured, right? If we wanted to measure optimism, the question should measure optimism, not something else. Okay, that is validity. And reliability means accurate. If we want to measure people's optimism, it should be accurate. It should accurately differentiate between someone who is more optimistic than someone who is less optimistic. If you know someone who is more optimistic for sure than someone else, and you measure, you use your questionnaire, you measure that, and you put them, and the numbers are the same, that's not accurate, right? It doesn't differentiate between the open-minded, between the optimistic and the more optimistic and less optimistic. So it's not reliable, it's not accurate. So that is called reliability. The two important things that we need to make sure are checked. And then, yes, and then we have the questionnaires, we collect the data and so on and so forth. And the rest of it is just, you can have a look. The issue is that how to get there, which this diagrams, this algorithm walks us through these stages. We collect the data, we'll see how much, if, for instance, if you order people from the lowest optimism to the highest optimism, and for instance, you look at the ages, if you see the more pessimistic people are normally the ones that are with higher ages, older people, then you can see, well, that sounds like a correlation. But we don't do that by eyes because there are too many people. You can't really detect that by eyes. That's why we use software programs. We use SPSS and like SPSS things, and they actually do the analysis for us. There are our eyes into the numbers, big numbers. Large amount of large amount of numbers. They can do that, and they generate graphs and scores. That this scores would tell us if there is a positive or negative relationship between age and pessimism. If that score is positive, that means the higher is the age, the more pessimistic the person is. If it's a negative score, that tells us actually with age, pessimism drops. Opposite, that's the negative correlation. Okay, these are things that we will explore and discuss later in more details.
I have a question.
And yes, okay. Any questions?
About results there now, but
sorry,
you're talking about results coming out of the questionnaire.
Yes, imaginary.
We're not actually going to have any results coming out of the questionnaire, are we? It's just going to be a question. The assignment's just on formulating the questions. We're not actually going to be getting any results from that assessment, are we?
No, I will feed you with the number, with the real data from a real questionnaire similar to yours.
Okay.
So don't worry about that. We can't really go to a field for so many reasons. We don't have resources. We don't have time. We can't go through the ethics approval. It takes a lot of time.
So assessment 2 is in no way related to assessment 3, is it? Assessment 3 is going to be completely different again, using the SPSF or whatever it is. It's a different assessment altogether, isn't it?
Different, not in the sense it will be the analysis of data, but not the data that you collected, because we can't collect data.
Right. Okay.
It's an analysis of a data that is as close as possible to this general topic.
Okay.
It's a data that has already measured Australians' open-mindedness.
Right. Cool. Thanks for that. I was just
Yeah,
clearing that up.
my pleasure. Okay, any other questions? Please let me know. If not, we can end the session. And I look forward to seeing you at the tutorials either with me on Wednesday or with other tutors in other days. Thank you so much, Catherine, and thank you everybody for being patient with me. I'll send some information about the chapters and I'll correct those issues. Have a great day.